Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Here to wish you a very happy Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. And for this week's episode, we're going to go back to 1985 to take a look at the Smiths' second record, the unbelievable Meat is Murder. Now, I would suggest that this record is as good as any record ever recorded by any other band in the world. This record is better than anything that your favorite band has ever put out. That being said, though, the Smiths were so great that they just continued to improve on every record. If you go back and you listen to Meat is Murder, you think to yourself, I don't know if a band could make a record that is any better than this masterpiece. And then the very next year, what did the band do? They put out The Queen is Dead, and they blew Meat is Murder out of the water, at least in my humble opinion. The Smiths were a band. I've said this before. I always say this when I talk about the band. The Smiths were a band that just got better with every single record, at least in my opinion. That being said, I will say that The Queen is Dead, which is their third record, is my favorite. Even though I think in a lot of ways, Strange Ways is a better album, it's just, it has Girlfriend in a Coma, which is something that I've always had a hard time getting past. And I would say that The Queen is Dead is so perfect in every way that one little hiccup on Strange Ways knocks it down one peg lower, in my opinion, than The Queen is Dead. So, as good as Meat is Murder is, and like I said, this record is better than anything that your favorite band has ever put out. This is still probably my third favorite record in the Smiths catalog. It is way better, and it was a big step away from the band's 1984 self-titled debut, which I absolutely love this record as well. This is my favorite debut album of all time. I think it's the greatest debut album of all time. But Meat is Murder is, in my opinion, it's just, so much better. This record was not only a lot better than the 1984 self-titled debut, but it was also, I would say it was a big sort of step away. It was a big step forward from the 1984 self-titled debut. To me, on this record, Meat is Murder, Morrissey's songwriting is just leaps and bounds ahead of where he was in 1984. Johnny Marr's guitar playing is vastly improved as well. But really, I think what this record does, Meat is Murder, as far as the band is concerned, is I think that this record really serves as kind of a coming out party for the band's rhythm section, Andy Rourke and Mike Joyce. Andy Rourke in particular, this record has some of Andy Rourke's best work, I think, throughout the Smiths' entire catalog. And I think it starts to show off that Andy Rourke really was a world-class bassist. Now, even Mike Joyce, I think Mike Joyce's drumming on this record is just the jugs. It's funny, if you listen to music fans, even sometimes, Smiths fans, everybody sort of agrees that Andy Rourke was an unbelievable, world-class bassist. Of course, he sadly passed away last year. But a lot of people, even the Smiths fans I talk to sometimes, sort of dismiss Mike Joyce. A lot of people say, well, anybody could do what Mike Joyce did. He didn't do anything that was that special. I completely disagree with that statement. I've always disagreed with that statement. Perhaps it's because Mike Joyce is my favorite drummer of all time. Behind really only Spencer Coburn is probably my second favorite drummer of all time. But I contest. I take the stand, at least, that without Mike Joyce, the Smiths would not have sounded the same. Now, you could make the argument maybe they would have been better with a different drummer. I don't think that this band could ever have been better than they are. I can't even imagine the Smiths being better than they are. I think there's a lot of tragedies to the band breaking up in 1987, but the biggest tragedy to me, at least, and of course Morrissey's solo career is just unbelievable. We all love his solo career. But just imagining where the band, the Smiths, might have gone, from 1987, because like I said, at least in my opinion, the band gets better with every single record, with the exception of the song Girlfriend in a Coma. But going back to Mike Joyce, I really disagree that Mike Joyce was, sort of the disposable member of the Smiths. I don't think any member of this band is disposable. I think every single member of this band, all four of the guys in this band, are integral to the band's sound. I don't think it's the same band with anybody else. And like I said, Mike Joyce is my favorite drummer of all time. Of course, he may not be, as accomplished as people like Neil Peart or Mike Portnoy or John Bonham but I don't really care. You can have those guys as far as I'm concerned. If I'm picking teams, I'm taking Mike Joyce first every time. He's always been my favorite drummer. Like I said, I think that this record is leaps and bounds better than the 1984 self-titled, which is, in my opinion, the greatest debut album of all time. Anyway, this record came out on February 11th, 1985. It was produced by Morrissey and Marr and engineered by Stephen Street. I love the production on this record. I mean, I think every single song on this entire record is basically flawless. I mean, you can't even pick a weakest song on this record if you wanted to. I love the production on this record. I'm of the opinion that sometimes it isn't always, the best idea for artists to produce their own records. Sometimes I feel like you need that, that sort of impartial voice in the studio with you, kind of working out little things here and there. I'm sure Stephen Street, when he engineered this record, I'm sure that he did offer his advice, whether it was solicited or not, but you can't really argue with the production on this record. Like I said, every song on this record is just almost perfect in every way. Of course, the album features the classic style, the timeless album artwork of the Smiths, one of my favorite album covers in the band's catalog. Now, that's one area I would argue that the 1984 record has Meat is Murder beat, is because the album cover on the 1984 Smiths debut, self-titled debut, is my favorite album cover in the entire Morrissey catalog. Of course, this picture was taken of an American soldier named Michael Wynn in 1967 as he was serving in Vietnam. The helmet is scrawled with the slogan, "Meat is Murder." Of course, that was changed. The original writing on the soldier's helmet said, "Make war, not love." Nice! Anyway, the first song on this record is a song called The Headmaster Ritual. Now, I grew up in the 1980s and into the 1990s. So the concept of corporal punishment in schools is something that is completely foreign to me. It's actually something I really can't even wrap my brain around. But I've talked to people who are of older generations, and it was a reality in their everyday life. Like I said, it's something I can't even wrap my brain around. Now, that's not to suggest that I didn't get my fair share of corporal punishment in the safety and sanctuary of my own home. But I remember talking to an older guy one time, and he was talking about how he went to this school, and the headmaster, or the principal, or whatever the title was at his school, he said that his school offered up corporal punishment. He admitted that he was a little bit of a troublemaker as a young kid, so he ended up in the principal's office, pretty frequently. And he was telling me a story about this guy who was their principal, who doled out the corporal punishment in school. And he said it was really, he said looking back on it as an adult, as a kid, you didn't really think that much about it, apart from how much it sucked getting your ass beat in school. But he said looking back on it, he felt like the principal of the school almost got like his almost like weirdo jollies out of it. I can't imagine what it must be like to spank somebody else's kid. I don't have kids myself, so I really can't imagine what it's like even spanking anybody for that matter. Fortunately, I think in our society nowadays, corporal punishment is something that is completely, fallen out of vogue. Like I said, when I was a kid, it was pretty normal. I got my fair share when I was growing up. Probably got your share and your share also. But it is interesting. I think it's a great thing that it's sort of fallen out of vogue. My wife and I were out the other day at a store. We were doing some, our weekly grocery shopping or whatever. And we saw this mom, and she had these two kids. Now, I tell you, I live in Tennessee. For some of you, that may conjure up images in your head of a lot of toothless hillbillies, which in some cases is true, especially when you go out into the countryside out here. It gets a little methy in some of these places, but if you picture Tennessee being sort of a bunch of kind of toothless hillbillies, this woman fit the card to a T, and she had these two kids, and the kids were kind of, acting like little butts, but that's kids' jobs, right? You wake up in the morning, you punch the clock, you act bratty, you take a break for lunch, you clock back in till the end of the day, you just act like a little jerk. That's what these kids were doing, and judging by the parents, I would suggest these kids probably had a pretty good reason to act like little jerks. But the mom, man, she was rough, and she was getting pretty handsy in public. And I remember thinking to myself, man, if this is what it's like in public, my heart breaks for what these kids go through behind closed doors, because I always assume, at least, that people are on their better behavior when they're in public. And I just remember my heart broke looking at these two kids, because I've been in that place, man. You're going home, and it's gonna be on. You also sort of, picture. This song also sort of makes you picture, a young Morrissey in his little school uniform, growing up in Manchester, being an outcast, sort of probably bullied by some of the toughs in his school, if you will. Something that I can kind of relate to. I grew up as a nerdy kid in a rural school. I grew up in a town where you basically had two grammar schools, one middle school, and one high school. You went to school with the same kids basically your whole life. The cliques that formed the first day of kindergarten were the cliques that were still in place the last day of senior year, and I was never really one of the kids that fit in. I never really had a lot of friends. I think I've mentioned on this channel I had basically one friend from 8th grade through 12th grade. That being said, I was relatively fortunate in the sense that I wasn't necessarily targeted by the mass of the student population. I also was relatively fortunate in the sense that I could see the writing on the wall by the time I was relatively young age. I think by the time I reached 7th or 8th grade, I sort of resigned myself to my social fate. I was like, all right, I'm never going to be one of the cool kids in the school. I'm never going to be popular. I'm probably never going to have a lot of friends. But at the same time, I also, at a relatively young age, because I grew up in a town I just did not have a lot of use for. I grew up around kids that I had nothing in common with, most of them, I felt. So I was like, I didn't really care. I resigned my fate. I resigned myself to the idea that I was just going to be kind of an outcast, and I accepted it. It didn't make high school any more fun. It didn't make, the days any more enjoyable. It didn't make the time go by any faster. But I was fortunate in the sense that I really wasn't, targeted directly very often. I think growing up I had, basically in grammar school, I had one kid that kind of bullied me a lot, in grammar school, and then for my first 2 years of high school, I left the town of Paradise, where I grew up most of my childhood, and we moved to this other smaller town, if you can believe it, a town called Corning, which the name pretty much tells you everything you need to know about that place. Corning was just the worst, man. Corning is like a suburb of hell. So I spent my first 2 years going to high school in that town. You talk about a bunch of just rednecks. I mean, like, no redeeming qualities in that town at all. And there was one kid, my first 2 years of high school, who really kind of like honed in on me. And I remember I used to walk to and from school every day. That was like my luggage. I loved it. I love walking. I still do. I pretty much try to walk everywhere if I could. Nashville's not a walkable city, so I drive everywhere here. But I prefer it when I live in places that are more walkable. But I used to walk home every day from school. And like at least 3 days a week, this kid, and I won't mention his name, but this kid would follow like 10 steps behind me, taunting me the whole time. So I'm like, kick your ass. I'm going to kill you. Turn around and fight me, you pussy. I'm going to rape your mom. And I'd just be walking like, in my head, just like, leave me alone. What was interesting about those first 2 years of high school, too, was those were not particularly happy days in my family, without going into too much detail. And as a kid, you want to like turn around and you want to reason with the guy and be like, hey man, you win. All right. My life sucks. I hate this town. I hate this school. I'm going home to a situation that is not very kosher, if you want to know the truth. So can you just like back off, man? Of course, that's not the way kids operate. And when I would turn around occasionally and try to give him some sort of verbal jab back, I'm not very good at talking tough because I'm not really a tough guy. And I remember when I turn around and, try to like say something badass back to him, it would just basically like blow up in my face. To turn around like, shut up, fart face! And he just laugh at me even worse. Yes, I remember that kid's name, but I'm not going to say it now. The next song after that is a song called Rushmore Ruffians. To me, this song, I love it. I love everything about every song on this record. But to me, this song reminds me of, like I said, I grew up in like a rural community. And to me, this song is like, it reminds me of the excitement you feel when the carnival comes to town. In my town, back in growing up, our carnival was called the Silver Dollar Fair. It came every May, and it was an event, and you look forward to it every year, especially when you got old enough, just to go with your friend. You didn't have to like have your parents go with you. That was always a day that we looked forward to. That was always one of the best days of the year. My best friend and I, we still talk about memories we made going to the fair. You get to eat like crappy food. You get to go on rides. You get to see exotic girls from like other schools. You get to like pet the animals. As a kid who grew up in a rural community, I have such great memories of the fair. That's what this song reminds me of. Like I said, you get to eat like crappy corn dogs. You get to win, cheap prizes. It was always such an event. It was something I looked forward to every year. The carnival folk. My wife and I actually just went to the carnival here, and I think it was in May, or it was sometime during the summer, at least out here. And it was like, it's not the same as an adult. I don't ride the rides anymore, but it's just such a fun experience. That's what that song makes me think of. Is just, spending your time, all year basically planning to go to the fair the next year. The next song after that is a song called I Want the One I Can't Have. I think the song is, obviously it's fairly self-explanatory. To me, I think this is one of the most underrated songs in the entire Smiths catalog. I think it's underrated because just every song on this record is so good. This song maybe doesn't stand out quite as much as some of the other ones, but I think it's as good as anything else on the record. I love this record. This is a song that, I would love for him to bring out of retirement, maybe play this song live. And there's a lot of songs I would love to see him play live on this record. I did see Headmaster Ritual. I think the last time I saw Headmaster Ritual was in 2004. I'd have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure he dusted that one off during the You Are the Quarry tour, and man, he killed it. That tour was just the jugs. Anyway, this song I think is about, somebody who's just like unattainable, somebody that you have very strong feelings for, that you have sort of put on a pedestal. For me, this song makes me think of, kind of going through, as a young kid, kind of going through, puberty. One day, girls don't really mean anything to you, at least in my experience. One day you're not really interested in girls, and then almost like the very next day you're just like, at least for me, it's just like girl crazy. I love that scene in High Fidelity where John Cusack talks about that. He said, one day you don't notice them, the next day they're there, and they've grown breasts, and they're just like, that's all that's in your head. To me, it makes me think of my high school crush. I basically had a crush on one girl pretty much all the way through high school. Of course, it never amounted to anything. It's hard to imagine that she wouldn't want to go out on a date with this guy. But it does make me think of her. She's somebody that, maybe it's because of the age I was and how much of a pedestal I put her on. I remember, you see her in the hall. I never had a class with her either. It was not fair. I never had a single class with her. In 4 years, I went to high school for 2 years, but I first discovered her in middle school. I never had a class with her. It was totally unfair. I mean, it probably would have affected my grades. I actually got semi-decent grades in high school, if you could imagine that. And I remember if I would have had a class with her, I'd just be like... But that was my high school crush. She's somebody I still... Not that I think about her, but I still wonder about her. I hope she's doing well. I hope everybody's doing well. I harbor no resentment. Even that guy who used to follow me home picking on me. I don't care. Who cares? I've heard some people suggest that this song is sort of a Morrissey calling out from the closet. I don't know that I necessarily agree or disagree with that. I think it's as good an explanation as any. But is this a song about, a homosexual sort of crush coming from Morrissey who is in the closet? I don't know. I could see that. I could see that also not being the case. The next song after that is one of the... every song on this record is just one of the best songs on the record, but the song is What She Said. This song is about a quiet, bookish, sullen girl who spends most of her time alone in her bedroom, reading some of the greatest literature ever written, searching out the answers to life's biggest questions, and then one day she meets a tattooed boy, basically from the wrong side of the tracks, who opens up her to a whole nother world. And despite the fact that she's read all of these books that are just packed with knowledge and sage advice, she ends up learning more about the world and more about herself from this guy who is tattooed, comes from the wrong side of the tracks, probably has a little bit of dirt under his fingernails. Now this reminds me of how my wife and I sort of met. My wife and I met in Santa Cruz back in, I think it was 2012 or 2013. And we worked together, and at the time, my wife, who is bookish and is a little bit quiet, we both are, but she was just sort of coming out of an oppressive religious environment. She had just made a decision that she was going to move away from a lot of her former friends. She was going to, set sail. She was going to create her own life. And she decided to move to Santa Cruz, and she began working with me. Now, for some reason, which is still a mystery to me, she sort of began to develop feelings for me and the whole thing. We started dating, and the rest is, as they say, history. But I sort of saw myself as being the tattooed boy, and kind of from the wrong side of the tracks. I am somebody who, although I may not have a lot of book smarts or any other smarts really, I have been a lot of places. I consider myself to be semi-worldly. I've traveled a lot. I've lived in a lot of different places. And I think in kind of a weird way, I sort of opened her eyes to at least my way of life. And her and I have, since her and I have been together, we've traveled a lot. She's the, the more sort of worldly one even than I am. But it does remind me of sort of how we, first began dating. I also remember the first time I met her dad. We went over to his house for like lunch or something like that. And of course, he's a dad. He's protective of his daughter. All that is understandable. I expect nothing less. But I remember as I walked in the door, he kind of was like out of his side eye at me, very distrusting. And again, I accept that. I don't think that I am the ideal son-in-law. I don't think I'm the guy that you most want your daughter to bring home. Now, in my defense, I consider myself to be a very respectable, hardworking guy, despite having a shark tattoo on my throat. I'm not a felon. I am literate. I've never really been in trouble. But, at the same time, I understand the concern when you see somebody like me walk in your front door. Definitely not the ideal son-in-law material. I grant you that. But eventually he warmed up to me enough, and, it all worked itself out. I've heard a lot of people suggest that this song is actually written about the origin of the Smiths, in the sense that Morrissey is the quiet, bookish, lonely, sullen girl living in her bedroom. We all know that Morrissey spent most of his adolescence tucked away in his bedroom, reading, obviously, probably very lonely. And Johnny Marr represents the tattooed boy who shows up out of the blue at his door and asks him to start a band together. I actually think that, now that may or may not be the origin of the song, but I actually think that is a pretty snug, interpretation of the lyrics. I could definitely see that being the case. Johnny Marr being kind of the, the working class kid from Manchester, and Morrissey being the, quiet, introverted, bookworm. I think it actually makes a lot of sense. I think it's as reasonable an explanation for the song as anything else. Next is another one of the greatest songs on the album, in my opinion. The song is That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. I think this song is, again, relatively self-explanatory, but brilliantly written, as all of Morrissey's songs are brilliantly written. I think this song is basically about the dismissive attitude some people have regarding things like depression. And, I think things have changed a lot in that arena since 1985. I think it used to be more commonplace, for, if you are somebody who has depression, people are like, hey, cheer up. All you got to do is cheer up. It's not that hard. After a while, people begin to realize that it's a disease. I'm somebody who I've struggled with depression most of my life. And, it's something that you can get frustrated with. You can get offended by, people who dismiss it or minimalize it or misjudge it. But really, it's like any other disease. I think people that don't suffer from it, can't really relate to it. I remember I had a conversation, and this is sort of on a different topic, but one thing that helped me understand that, how some people can misinterpret things or minimalize things or, not fully understand, the level of the intensity of a disease is, I remember I was talking to my dad one time, and this was back in 1994. I was a senior in high school, and it was the weekend that Kurt Cobain died. Kurt Cobain died on a Friday, I remember, because I found out on my way home from school, and like a lot of people that age, my age, it was something that affected me. I was very upset over the death of Kurt Cobain. I remember I spent that entire weekend at home watching MTV, watching all the coverage of Kurt Cobain's death. It was something that, for my generation, it was the first time one of our guys went out like that. And I remember sitting there, my dad and I were watching MTV together, and they were talking about Kurt Cobain's substance abuse, and they talked about one of these, it was either Kurt Loder or one of the other MTV news anchors, basically said, Kurt Cobain began using heroin because he had this chronic ulcer in his stomach, that caused pain, and he was, in chronic pain, so he basically started using heroin. And I remember my dad, who's worked in the recovery field for decades, as an expert on the subject, he kind of scoffed out loud. And it seems reasonable to me. I'm a 18-year-old kid. It seems reasonable. Yeah, stomach hurts, whatever. And my dad sort of scoffed out loud. And he basically says, like, these people, they don't understand the disease. And it's not that they're doing it maliciously or they're not trying to misinterpret what's going on. But he's like, you don't become a heroin addict because your stomach hurts. And my dad and I actually had one of the first times, I remember this conversation vividly. It was one of the first times that my dad and I actually had like a really at the time it felt like a big, cool adult conversation. My dad talked to me, about, the disease and what it was really all about and the warning signs. And, he's like, yeah, you don't become a heroin addict because you have an ulcer. This is something that is inside of you. It's a disease. So I think, like I said, I think the song is about the sort of dismissive attitude about, something like depression. And I do think that has changed a lot. I think it's fortunate that now mental health is something that is taken a lot more seriously and is given the attention that I think it deserves. The title of this song, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, also makes me think about something that was prevalent when I was a kid. And this is something that, and I'm not often necessarily proud of humanity, but this is something that makes me proud of humanity. When I was a kid, it was commonplace, at least among me and my, friends, that if, something was lame or, just really not snug, it would be very commonplace to be like, man, that's G. And I'm pretty sure you can figure out what the G stands for. Or if one of your friends, was being like a wet blanket or acting like a total square, you'd be like, come on, man, quit being such an F. I'm sure you can, ascertain what F stands for. But at a certain point, you realize that those words, can be considered hurtful and offensive to other people. And that's one thing that makes me proud of humanity, is that we continue to evolve. We continue to try to improve ourselves, become a little bit more sensitive to those around us. But I remember, saying those things back then, it didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything homophobic. It was just part of, at least for me, and maybe I'm the only person in the world that ever said stuff like that, but it was just commonplace. It was like how you would bust somebody's balls. I think the first time I became sort of aware of this, a phrase, running its course was with my grandparents. My grandparents were both lovely people. My grandparents were ultra not racist. They were actually quite lovely, quite, I wouldn't say liberal or progressive, but they were very, tolerant of everybody. But I remember that, and this is a generational thing, but my grandparents used to bust out the word colored when they were referring to certain members of our community. And I remember every time they would say that word, I'd be like, what? You'd be like, you just heard a gunshot. I'd be like, what the fuck was that? What'd you just say? And they'd be like, oh, Tom, the colored guy. You'd be like, good. Can we change the subject, please? You'd always have to bust this out in public, too. They'd be, what? You're like, just drop it. Okay. Like I said, my grandparents weren't bad people. They weren't racist in any way. It was just a generational thing. They didn't adapt, at least when it came to the word colored, which always puckered my starfish, if you know what I mean. Anyway, the next song after that starts off side 2. The song is called Nowhere Fast. To me, I think that this song is basically a protest anthem against wealth disparity and the ruling class. I love the imagery of Morrissey dropping his pants to the Queen. As an American, that's something that we don't have over in this country. I mean, we definitely have a ruling class. We don't necessarily have a royal family, although I guess even that's debatable. But I love the imagery of mooning the Queen. Basically, I would love it in this country at least, and I can only speak as an American. I would love it if people were more united in this country when it came to the ruling class. I think in this country, a good way to protest the ruling class, at least in this country, would be if people quit bickering amongst themselves over these little trivial issues. And I guess some of the issues aren't necessarily trivial, but we spend so much time bickering with each other because we're being distracted by the ruling class in this country so they can get away with whatever they want. I think we need to unify and realize that the ruling class are actually kind of our enemies and take them on that way instead of them controlling us and bickering amongst each other so that they basically can get away with whatever crime they feel like committing that day. The next song after that, again, is a fairly self-explanatory song, but an amazing song. That song is called Well, I Wonder. To me, the song is about either unrequited love or maybe somebody that was a former love, and you kind of wonder if they still think about you, if they still hold you in any sort of regard. I think that the song is very self-explanatory. It's beautiful. Every song on this record, like I said, is pretty much perfect in every way. The next song after that is a song called Barbarism Begins at Home. In my opinion, this is the greatest song in the career of Smith's bassist Andy Rourke. To me, this is just perfection on the bass. This song has a long tail towards the end of it, which I don't always love, but his bass playing on this song, it's life-changing, to be honest with you. This song is Andy Rourke's best song, at least in my opinion. I think that this song is basically a very sad, dark, depressing song about child abuse, like I mentioned earlier, talking about headmaster ritual. And fortunately, I think it's a good thing in our society that corporal punishment is something that, at least with most people, has fallen kind of into the past. Like I said, I was somebody who I got my fair share of corporal punishment growing up. I don't think I would go as far as using the word abuse, but it was definitely more, a part of society back then. I've got friends that are teachers. I also have my dad who used to work in a sort of wing of the correction field, and they both told me, you can basically spot the kids that have these issues. They have behavioral problems at school. Some of them become adults who end up in the system, and it's like, man, sometimes you get the opportunity to meet their parents, and it just tells you everything you need to know just meeting their parents. Anyway, the last song on the record, it closes out with the title track, Meat is Murder. Another very self-explanatory but perfect song. I have to give credit where it's due. This song, I was told, was written as the band were on their first American tour, and the band had made their first stop at a Texas roadhouse, getting a little grub while they're out on the road. Morrissey had just polished off a 22-ouncer. He sat back, he kind of popped his button, let it simmer a little bit. Bassist Andy Rourke looked over at Morrissey and said, man, that looked really good. How was it? And Morrissey said, man, they murdered that. That was the best steak I've ever had. The meal impressed Morrissey so much and affected his life so dramatically that he wrote this song and named the album after that particular trip to Texas Roadhouse. I've had meals like that. I've had meals that could change your religion. Not necessarily Texas Roadhouse, but it was probably foreign to them, being from the UK. You get those big Texas-sized portions, a big old hunk of dead meat sitting in front of you. It's life-changing. I totally understand that. This is a song that I love. Obviously, this song is very dark, very sad. The intro to this song just rips your guts out. This is a song, I will say this, and I love it. I love this song. I love every song off this record. But if there were one song, and I've seen Morrissey do this song live a few times, and I don't advocate this very often at all, but if you're going to retire one song from the live set, if I had my choice, it would probably be Me Is Murder. Only because, and I love the song, and I love the message. But if you're at a Morrissey show, and I'm not saying that Morrissey songs are all like, pom-pom cheerleader, rah, 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 because they're not. We all know that. But even in the context of a Morrissey show, this song is like the ultimate buzzkill. You hear the intro to this song start, and you just want to start weeping uncontrollably. I love this song, though. This song is powerful. It's beautiful. It's something that Morrissey is obviously very passionate about. He has been his entire life. I have all the respect in the world for that. I love the instrumentation on this song. I love the lyrics. I mean, this is, again, you have to say this about every Morrissey song in the entire catalog, whether you're a fan of it or not. I mean, every song is so, beautifully well written. This is, like I said, this is something that Morrissey, this is a song that he pours in the creation process with the lyrics. He poured his guts into it. On this performance, he pours his guts into it. And I will say this, too, and like I just said, seeing it live is sort of a downer. But every time I have seen him perform this song live, he pours his entire self into it. There are songs throughout Morrissey's catalog, of course, there's songs that are old, and he probably just gets really tired of playing. I mean, can you imagine having to go out there every night and sing Suede Head as if it was, fresh to you? I mean, I get it, but this song is a song that Morrissey, when he plays it live, he just he puts in his entire self into this song. But that being said, if I never saw this song live again, it'd be all right. But I do love it. It closes out the album. Like I said, this album, to me, there's not a bad song. There's really not a bad second on this entire album. Like I said, this album is better than anything that your favorite band has ever put out. And it's the third best album, to me, in the Smiths catalog. That is how unbelievable this band was. Breaks your heart when you think about where they could have gone had they not imploded in 1987. But the question also is, do the 4 records, does the relatively brief career, does it add something to it? Does it add to the mythology? Of course, with Andy Rourke being gone now, the reunion could never happen. I'm not saying that it was going to happen. I'm not one of those Smiths fans that even was necessarily sitting around pining for it. Now, if it happened, I mean, I would probably drop a log in my trunks and probably drop any amount of money that they asked. But that being said, I don't think it was necessary. And now, of course, with Andy Rourke on, it can never happen. You can't have it. You can't have a Smiths reunion without all 4 of the original guys, and really only the 4 original guys. No offense to people like Craig Gannon or anybody else that played with the band, but really it was just the 4 guys. There's only 4 members of the Smiths, at least in my opinion. So the reunion is off of the table, but we do have the records. And holy crap, this record just... Every time I listen to it, and I mean, I've been listening to it this week. I mean, I'm not listening to the Smiths, but I was listening to it specifically this week, trying to write some ideas down about it. And every time I listen to it, it never ceases to blow me away. Like I said, this is easily the greatest band of all time. I mean, how many more ways can I say it? Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. If you enjoyed this record, or if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check back every week for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. Be sure to go out and support your local record store, and check back periodically for other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, talk to you then.